This room holds, I read coming in, 149 people. That, given our panel, means there are probably in excess of 320 business plans and pitches that you'd like to offer these guys later on. And I hope most of them concern data and data science, not just because you came to the DataEDGE conference, and not just because they've all had a lot of experience in that field, both as practitioners and as investors, but for the benefit of the handful of us who don't have business plans as well. I want to explore in this session a picture of a kind of overall system. It occurred to me that everyone here is making decisions about the world, making investments to further that world, and managing risk inside that. But when you've got 4 of them together, all of whom are making various investments, you have an opportunity to create a kind of mosaic that might suggest in totality where data science and the infrastructure that propels this, and to a large extent much of the economy of the future, is what it's going to look like and where that's going to go and what other opportunities and learning and challenges will be created. So I hope we can touch a little bit in this on the sourcing of data, be it phones or human-worn objects or sensors, the network transmission requirements, the storage, the data analysis frameworks you might use, the analysis, and of course, to circle back, the end use cases it will be put to, because that is closely tied to the point of origin as well, and much that goes in the middle. You're investing here, you're talking to companies and their needs, so perhaps we can get there over the course of the next 30, 40 minutes and take a few questions. And I'll begin by going down the line, starting with you, Michael. What are you confident is true about the world today or the world that is coming towards us? And what inside that guides the choices you've made in your investments and what you're looking for?
Right. Almost nothing.
Yeah. Fantastic. I guess we're done.
Yeah, okay, we're done. My job here is done. Actually, I want to link up your question to the last question that was asked about neuroscience, and I'll give you one area that we are actively looking for investments in. It's actually hard to find them at the moment, but it's the intersection of neuroscience, behavioral social science, and computation and data. And there's a heaven and a hell view of the future 5 to 10 years out, right? The heaven view is that the data is permitting us to make better informed, data-driven decisions and freeing us up to be more creative because we have more accurate information about whatever set of decisions we're trying to make. The hell view is we're all being closely monitored. There's so much information about us out there that our behavior is being shaped and manipulated now on a scientific basis because of neuroscience and advances in neuroscience.
So did you want to make a buck or answer a deep philosophical question?
Well, you can make a lot of buck. I mean, it's the next generation of marketing is one way to think about it.
Right.
I don't know if that's heaven or hell. It depends whether you're a marketer or not.
Okay. But in this world, do you think that's a problem that gets solved?
In many ways, it's a problem that's already being solved.
Right.
And, hopefully we'll be more conscious about the decisions that, let me take it out of the 40,000-foot level and give you a practical example. So there's a lot of work going on about why do things go viral, right? Mm-hmm. It's going on in this university, it's going on at Stanford, a bunch of other places. It is possible to envision at some point in time being able to actively present information in a specific context and in the right order so that some things have a much higher probability of going viral than not. It's also quite possible to impede virality in the same way. Mm-hmm. One can imagine an arms race going on between marketers in order to position information that people get in ways that try and influence their behavior in that sense. Mm-hmm. Definitely going to happen. It is already happening to some extent, very crude today because none of the data is that accurate and in terms of its ability to shape behavior yet, but it is coming.
Now, Mamoon, I don't know much about social and capital, so I'd be grateful if you could spend a minute on what the organization itself does, but also to come back to my question, what are you looking at you think is the richest area to develop?
Yeah, so Social Capital, we're about a 3-year-old firm. We're based down in Palo Alto, and we have a core focus around investing around healthcare, education, and financial services companies. And then we also do spend quite a bit of time looking at the change in the enterprise and consumer landscape. The backgrounds of the partners there do come from more of the consumer side and then some light enterprise, more business applications. So why did we decide to go after education, healthcare, financial services, three sort of pillars of society, things that governments are usually responsible for providing and taking care of. And we had a fundamental belief that those three areas were underserved by technology and advances in data science and all the things that we learned and did in the enterprise and the consumer space. So in particular, the things that we are backing in those three areas are advances in data science. So to give you an example, one of my partners was an early executive at Facebook, and he was responsible for growth and sort of on the product side. And the lessons learned there around, hey, how many photos do you have to upload, and how many views does it have to get a person to be really engaged on the platform, and how will that further cause virality? And same way, invested in gaming companies, how do you get a game to be gamers to be more engaged and pay more for virtual goods? And at some point, the social value to that is, one could argue, like, it's great, Facebook is a great platform, but what's the nth game or the nth photo sharing app that goes viral? How could you apply some of those lessons around data science that was used to make the decisions around the product level into healthcare? So how do you use data across different EMRs and figure out, like, the 100,000 people across the world who have the same disease, but we just don't know about what the symptoms are, what the actual reasons are, how to treat the disease. So using those lessons to bring it back to healthcare and funding entrepreneurs who are tackling sort of greater issues around healthcare and education.
Now, it probably hasn't been lost on you that those are three of the most regulated areas you could have found in the economy to attach yourself to. Does data science coexist well with that, given concerns around privacy and security or entrenched practices by virtue of the fact that they are regulated, and that creates a kind of statutory process of how things are done?
I think it's a very fair point, and it's something that what it does, it just takes longer. Like the companies that have a direct-to-consumer path or a path into the enterprise, where it's you can launch a game, you can get consumers, you can get them to pay. On the enterprise side, you can get a salesperson to call on a customer for 3 months, and you can get the deal. In healthcare, in financial services, it just takes longer. Although we have backed a number of companies where you are dealing with, yes, the FDA, whether if it's a device or some software or HIPAA compliance. So things just take a little bit longer. They are more regulated, so it takes longer, hence more capital. But we're willing to be patient, because I think those are greater problems that need to be solved by venture capitalists and entrepreneurs alike.
So Adam, our first two speakers addressed kind of consequences of data analysis, what might be done in the consumer world, or what was the nice word used for propaganda? But on your side, are you interested in these areas as well, or is it more in the back end and sort of the nicer word for plumbing, the way in which this actually holds together and works?
Well, at Google Ventures, we're actually interested in both. I think, given the Google DNA, if go back 15 years, if you wanted to ask a question, do some research, you're going to go to the library, you're going to look up the microfiche, and it's going to take 2-3 hours. So it's pretty expensive to ask a question. A lot of the newer data infrastructure companies, so Spark, Databricks, and Hadoop at Cloudera, are basically allowing not you to ask the same question you're asking now, just faster. They're allowing you to make it 100 times cheaper, so you can ask 100 more questions of data. And I think that foundation is very, very important. I think that actually, who knows what's going to happen in the future, but fast forward 5 years, people will be asking in all functions, will be asking a lot more questions of the data. So that's kind of what gets us excited about these enabling technologies. But having said that, what excites me the most is entrepreneurs walking in, and they have figured out a way to use the latest in data technologies and machine learning to apply it to a problem, like a use case in the economy. And we've done the most investing kind of at that layer at use case specific applications. For example, I think the news was out today, Flatiron Health, which focuses on integrating patient records for cancer. It's shocking that only about 4 or 5% of cancer patients are tracked. For example, if Amgen has a drug, it only goes within a clinical trial. It knows how the drug is doing and what the side effects are and what the consequences are. So I think it's vitally important that companies, that startups, or other organizations are able to integrate to get a full picture of that. That's healthcare, specifically cancer. And I think most of you are familiar with, we also invest in Climate Corporation. So applying this stuff to agriculture of all things, allowing a farmer to put a file in their combine that it would modulate how much phosphates and nitrates and seed, et cetera, go into to each field.
So I think there's an interesting implicit observation in what you're saying as well, which is, Hadoop, Big Table, what have you, were created out of necessity because all of this unstructured data just started coming in masses by basically clicks, right? But now the internet is sort of blowing out across the entire physical world as sensors that are delivering digital information are deployed everywhere observing behavior, so that the need that arose inside a Google or a Yahoo is now a need that applies to all sorts of industries.
Yes and no. I mean, there's a pitfall to, there's all this technology, all this data out there. Is there a successful company that's going to be stood up around it? And if you look again to what this panel, the panel before it spoke to, the problem that you're solving is very critical. So what sensor data are we interested in and for what use? And I think the ones that are coming to the front, the ones that have been exciting that I've seen, are obviously ones around machine utilization in a data center. How do you optimize a data center? How do you know that a disk is about to break down? That is the kind of Internet of Things that is
Clear problem.
Clear path, clear problem, and so on.
And Jake, when you talk to industries or customers and they bring a need to you, which sectors do you think have the most kind of vivid or compelling areas?
Well, I mean, I'd say in addition to so many industries that just in their use of data are really living in the Stone Age. I mean, take government RFPs that govern about $40 billion to spend in the US alone. Look at how those things are put up on websites at the federal level, relatively centralized, at the state and municipal level at about 90,000 websites, and have humans that go through it to figure out whether or not these are contracts that people should bid on. And it's some pretty low-hanging fruit to think about how data analysis could improve that process. When I look out over across really all of the software that people use in their day-to-day lives and their business life and compare it to what they use in their personal life, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazon of the world, it all sucks.
Now, by that term of art, what do you mean?
And what I mean for the most part, it's not data-driven. And the opportunity that I see in front of us is to figure out how we can make people's lives more efficient, make them more productive at their jobs by creating these data feedback loops. If you look at what a lot of technologies, and whether it's CRM, ERP, marketing automation space, they've taken these old concepts that existed when we still built the same software on mainframes, put it into client server, put it into cloud, and maybe put some nice new JavaScript UI on top. But the same business processes exist. And the question at hand is really, how can you bring some of this, these piles of machine exhaust that we're not quite sure what to do with it to bear on the problem?
Right.
Whether it's the mobile data telemetry, whether it's the social data and all these open data sources, to create that little loop where you're presenting the information that someone needs to make a decision, or even not just letting them ask the question, but making the decision for them, right? And guiding them along that path so that they can do their job more efficiently. And I think that literally every business-facing piece of software is really ripe for disruption, and it's simply a question of whether the incumbents are going to figure this out, or whether young upstarts are.
You and Mamoon are sort of taking the problem from two entirely different approaches, which is really interesting. You're saying there are these industries, they are so burdened, and we can find things in there. You're saying there is all this data, some of it has value, some of it does not. And it's almost, I just wanted to say, it's it's like observing two different ways to attack
Yeah,
the
I
problem.
think
the data that is here versus the problem that wants
the
to
thing
be
that
solved.
ties it together, and the thing that's probably the most important, is the team that's going to go tackle these problems. And whether it's data first or space first, it really requires this unique union of folks that understand modern data infrastructure and understand a domain, whether it's education or business process.
So would you rather have a fantastic data scientist or a guy who just deeply understood his industry almost on an intuitive level? Or do you try and build a team that is both?
Don't take the bait.
Everybody wants both.
Yeah, everyone wants both, and in the Bay Area in particular, the risk is that you find these phenomenal data-oriented people that think they're solving a problem,
Right.
and too often, maybe they're solving a problem, they're optimizing for this local maxima. So the number of companies that build really useful tools to sell to all other venture-funded Bay Area startups is quite surprising. And while that might be interesting for some, that's not the right recipe of success. To build
It is humbling to sort of realize the people in these other industries away from us are actually pretty good at what they do, and they're making their choices for a reason.
Absolutely.
They just can't be dismissed. And certainly you're going to have to incorporate their way of working with whatever you're coming up
Yeah, I
with.
mean, what's common, and I think you heard from all of us, is and again, it's the heaven scenario as opposed to the hell scenario, but it's using these tools to make better decisions, right? At the end of the day, in a way that increases revenues, that solves social problems, that provides more knowledge that people can continue to innovate with.
What are the
I'll
interesting-
add one more point, even at the first layer that you mentioned, the sensors.
Yeah.
And I think to Joe's earlier point, a lot of these things have not been properly instrumented, the most interesting things. So if you think of all the wearables, they're not actually sensing the most interesting things.
Right.
And I think there is an opportunity there for really, really advanced sensors that would give you useful things. And that applies actually across a range of industries. It's pretty challenging hardware problems.
Or even correcting for inherent problems in the sensors, bringing them to a common standard. I was with a
But it's not just a sensor problem, though. I mean, just to riff on that thought, the other issue is, what is the data telling you? Is it actionable in any way that improves human health or not? Is it actionable beyond the insight from Fitbit that if you get up from noon on, you're probably going to burn less calories than you get up before noon.
Well, if you have a blood sugar sensor, now we're talking, right?
Right, exactly. If you can actually get the physiological data and it's meaningful to improve a therapeutic decision that you make or that your physician makes, then it really becomes meaningful.
It sounds like you're saying we're going to move from specific data collection to making models that are sort of ecosystems of data, different contributions towards an overall sense of an activity. And the sources will be multiple. The cleansing has to be high level. That sounds expensive and difficult.
Difficult, yeah. I mean, I think all of us would, the ideal startup we're all looking for at this point is a startup that actually, I can't remember who said it, but, solves an actual valuable problem, as opposed to just generates greater information.
Right.
So, in the marketing realm, there are many startups that can tell you how to slice and dice your customer base to ever finer levels of granularity. But that information doesn't necessarily get to an economic value proposition. Does that information permit me to convert more customers? Does it permit me to better understand what the lifetime value of a given set of customers is? Right? And then extract that value over time. It's the link to the business insight that's critical here. And the tools that the last panel are building are critical to generate the potential for seeing those insights, but it's the entrepreneurs. It's actually not us. You should have a panel of entrepreneurs talking about this.
Well, we just did that.
Rather than it's very true. Answering the same question. Because it's the entrepreneurs that envision the future, understand where the value is, and lead us as investors into the future.
There was something kind of baked into that. So kind of the automated decision maker, which is pretty dicey. So there are certain applications, if you're doing real-time bidding for advertising, okay, I mean, low cost of making mistakes and correctable after the fact. In most of the problems that are high value, where I've seen machine learning do best is when it does kind of automates the lowest 80% of the work. And then it's smart enough to know when it's
Absolutely.
when it's in the top 20%, it kicks it up to a domain
Turn it
expert
over
or
to a human, or
pretty much, yeah.
are you cursing AI here?
No, but I think the path forward are I think starting with the position I'm going to 100% automate something is just not realistic.
Right, and you do want to see how it interacts with
Yeah.
the existing corporate sociology.
Yeah.
Otherwise, very tough sell into the organization. About a year ago, maybe a little more, I realized if I saw one more Hadoop company, I was going to have to jump out a
There are
window.
only 3.
Now there are only 3. Then there were more. What are you? I'll start with you, Mamoon. What are you seeing just too much of at this point? What are people bringing up that just makes you roll your eyes?
There are a couple of things. So yeah, a year ago, whether it's a Hadoop, Mongo, Riot, Couchbase, whatever flavor of big data, database, it was getting a little old.
It gets thick. Well,
And
6 start,
and
1
we
finishes.
I think we have some investors of some of those companies that are doing pretty well. But we sort of, when we started the fund, it was a bit, the writing was on the wall, which one of those companies was going to win. So we haven't made an investment in an infrastructure company, and we've spent most of our time looking at the applications, the end applications of all that infrastructure. What can you do with the rise of big data and all the infrastructure and the plumbing that now exists in collecting, storing,
So you feel like the
processing.
analysis frameworks are kind of set now?
Yes. From our standpoint, yes. Like the plumbing is there, the infrastructure is there. There will be innovations around it by the companies that have over the last 5 years come about. So we've focused on, okay, assuming that that's there, and now let's build applications on top of that.
I agree with Mamoon about 99%, but Google was like the 19th search engine that came out. So that's, if you're coming in and it's the next NoSQL database, the hurdle is actually pretty high that, it's gonna be exciting, but maybe there's one chance out of 100 it's gonna be great.
I'd also, just add that I don't know if it's that simple as there's just plumbing and then applications on top, right? If you think about, and this talk track might have been a little bit overset at this point, but if you think about Hadoop, we've taken a giant step backwards in terms of what you can do with MapReduce and what you could do with the generational tools ago in terms of application building, in terms of analysis just on raw Hadoop, right? It's really hard. There's not very many people that are sophisticated enough programmers to take advantage of it. So the question is, what layers do we need on top? What other storage layers, what other data prep layers, what other analysis framework? There's this whole bucket, what other in-memory layers of data tooling and intermediate layers do we need to enable that application building? And while I think the plumbing is hardening now we're getting up to the scaffolding on which applications are going to be built, and I think that's largely what's going to differentiate some of these other players, because none of the database vendors are going to be worth tens and tens of billions of dollars if they're just a database company, right? We need all the applications to be built on top of them, and whoever can figure out how to enable that in the most elegant manner will derive most of the benefit.
You had a question that I didn't answer, which was, what are you seeing right now that seems like it's overblown or it's just way too many companies? And the one that comes to mind immediately is sort of marketing software, sort of marketing analytics software.
Yes.
And I can give you some insight. So we're investors in a few companies that monitor different SaaS applications, and it is actually the one area where you have the most, probably the potential for future market size is great, but in terms of there are way too many companies that are doing various forms of whether it's marketing automation or marketing analytics or social media marketing tools, sentiment analysis, are very much positioned as big data companies. Like, we take lots of data and make sense of it for you. And it turns out that most marketers, I don't think, are savvy enough to look at lots of just data and make decisions based on that. So it goes back to, I think, the point you were trying to make is it has to be like a key insight. You just, most people, just to put it bluntly, aren't smart enough to deal with lots of stats and data. So we have to give them this is what you need to do. This is so. In that vein, we have a company that helps software businesses manage their churn and their upsell. So it identifies, hey, this is a company that's going to churn if you let it go. You need to help them do this, this, and that because their engagement's dropped like 70% in the last month. So more insight and more actionable things. So tying the data back to actual actions. So even though, so that's one area I watch out, and I haven't, we haven't done many investments in that area just because we think it's super saturated, and there might be a few winners, but definitely not 100 winners. And there's probably more than 100 companies there.
In truth, this being Silicon Valley, we're in the midst of a major both bubble and reality distortion bubble. There's too much noise throughout the entire ecosystem at the application level, certainly in marketing, but in a whole bunch of other areas as well. But there are also unsolved problems. And so there's this mismatch between a lot of capability that's out there that potentially could solve problems. It's not necessarily directed at the problems that need solving, right, which are the ones that generate economic value for someone. So it's both wildly crowded, but there's a whole bunch of potentially interesting areas where new startups are starting to percolate up, whether it's in human resources, solved at one level in the last generation. Now there's an opportunity to do much better inside the enterprise, or in financial services, lots of unsolved problems there, as we discover every time there's a financial bubble. At the end of the day, even in the infrastructure layer, there are a lot of unsolved problems. We all talk about this world as if it works seamlessly, and I can just plug Tableau into Hadoop and it'll all work like magic. It doesn't.
What?
Right? There are a lot of unsolved problems in the infrastructure that many of the companies we've all funded are working on.
I also wonder what will happen in sourcing. Just in the past month or two, I've been looking at all of the cost of drones and satellites and all of the little satellite outfits, and how much visual information is going to be punching at everything that moves and can be seen will just flood it. And tagging that and how that will be stored and kept and related to will be an interesting problem. And then GE and Cisco and those other guys formed this Internet of Things consortium to standardize around things like power levels and sensors that I had never thought of. And all of that will create interesting problems around storage or organization as well that may create some whole new framework.
On the positive side, one of the things we are going to see, I'm a strong believer in this, is kind of a renaissance of American manufacturing as some of these trends come together. If you look at what someone like GE is doing with locomotives, where the locomotive is actively providing feedback, lots and lots of information. Their jet engines do the same thing in a way that permits you to ultimately design better and better locomotives. Bring that back, you combine it with the fact that the U.S. is going to be a low-cost place to produce from an energy consumption standpoint because of shale oil and shale gas, environmental issues notwithstanding. And with the whole maker movement, another piece of this puzzle, a lot of things need to be standardized in terms of data flows, data modeling.
The CTO of GE said to me that because we want sensors in our turbines and our locomotives and our jet engines, we want to control more of the manufacturing. We will bring that back to the United States. It'll all be done by robots, so forget the job part. But we will.
But there'll be data science jobs.
There you go. Yeah, other things will be created. You can worry that that's for a different conference. But the reality is. The big may get very big out of all this because they want to control large processes. Do you see a lot of M&A of your existing companies into these emerging industrial giants around data?
Maybe you should talk about Monsanto buying Climate Corp, right?
Thank you for that. Oh. Yeah, and I think the usual synergy there, why bigger corporations pay up for these startups, is they have the channel. They've invested in the channel and the billing relationship with the customers. It would cost a similar startup hundreds of millions to build up that marketing and sales and distribution channel. So that there are economics that are driving these kinds of acquisitions. Mm-hmm. Who knows if there will be successful integrations and all of that, but that's should we do Q&A?
No, does everyone know that Monsanto
Yes.
bought Climate Corp?
Yes.
For $1 billion.
I know, but
For $1 billion?
in the room, I'm not sure if everybody knew.
Do you know what Climate Corp is? Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Former Google guys gathered together a lot of weather and soil data. And you could combine this with knowledge of root structures of various crops and start to talk about how far apart to plant your corn seeds, or whether you wanted to have, given the probability of rainfall in the past several months, do you want to plant rye or do you want to plant winter wheat or I'm not so good at that point, but Monsanto bought that, and they hope to put that together with what's called precision planting, which are sensors in planters that tell you how deep to put a seed. And you talk to those guys, and it really is quite shocking. They'll say, there's about 1 million acres globally where we want to plant for every square meter. Like we want to understand every square meter, the water flow in it, how deep each seed goes. And then you talk to these satellite companies, and they talk about manufacturing systems where the world gets a new comprehensive photograph every 24 hours. And bring the sensors up, it can start looking at infrared plant condition, leaf conditions, and see how fast things are growing. We're talking about having this, you talk about individuals being managed. The world will be this giant greenhouse. Now, that may be hubris. That may be how you feed 10 billion people. It's not clear. But is that the far end of it, or are we seeing that kind of ambition from other industries? When you talk to companies, do they see doing things at this scale?
I think there's a huge opportunity for industrial process automation, whether it's in managing the power grid or a lot of our public infrastructure more efficiently, and the capitalist in me sees a lot of opportunity there, but there's also a lot of risk and a lot of need for things like security, right? Because at least in a world where everything was separate and siloed, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to take down one thing. Right. Now you put all the controls in the hand, one centralized place, maybe the
world is a big greenhouse. Here come the Russian hackers.
Yeah, and it's not that unfathomable.
Well, and don't forget, the entry to Target was through the HVAC system.
Right.
They might have just found the
Internet of Things.
Yeah. Massive levels of good. Security is a very interesting issue where this is concerned. And that's just a kind of unending war. Does security get solved?
No.
Permanently? No.
No.
Impossible.
Impossible.
Yeah.
It's an arms race.
But it's why we continue as a valley to invest in security every generation.
Right.
When you have the CEO of Target losing his job because of a security breach, it's a lot easier to sell security products.
To CEOs.
Yeah, as somebody at a very large security firm said to me, they can lose $1 billion, but they hate being embarrassed.
Yeah.
That's really that's your job.
It's the American form of seppuku.
Spending more time with your family? That's cruel. I've been told our speaker has been delayed on the bridge, so we have time for one more question, and then we can do a little Q&A with the audience. What are the other important dimensions in this? Do you feel everything's going to go to the public cloud? Do you feel that robots will become an important contributor? Can we extract, does big data exist in this kind of larger ecosystem of technology? Or are these other influences quite important as you build out?
That's a broad question. I'll try to have a comment or two. So one, I think will be interesting. Data does have gravity, and it will be interesting to see where it continues to accrue over time. I think the notion that a lot of companies getting started today would start with things on-prem, right? If they're not planning to do things at tremendous scale, is hard to fathom. But by the same token, there's a lot of regulation that's going to have to change before entire industries have any ability to even consider the move, and the notion
of these laws are about 70s technology.
Yeah, and the notion that we're going to be able to, search and report across data that's physically so far apart, and we'll have one elegant solution, is a little bit far-fetched. I think one of the opportunities going forward is to really understand the political implications. So if you think about how many industries are not just hung up on the technology, but the entrepreneurs that understand the landscape enough to navigate that. Like healthcare IT is a perfect example. Like there's very few things from healthcare IT that are not from 1970, right? So I can probably build things in some dimensions that would be useful, but the people that know how to navigate those landscapes to bring these technologies to market, the Google driving car, I would bet money can drive it, will drive itself far before the regulations allow for it. So it'll be really interesting to see how all of these cultural and political things come into play.
Somebody pointed out to me, if it's a regulated industry, sooner or later it ends up in court, and the defense is always, I followed the regulation. So if the regulations are written against a certain technology framework, it's really hard to move out of that.
I think we've had court challenges to some of the regulations, and I think we'll see more of those. Especially, I mean, we've had some in drones, and I think we're going to have in other industries, likely. But specifically about the question on cloud,
Yeah.
I think we're going to see more attention to applications that can move loads across clouds. Because it is, you know, you're replacing one problem with another when you're in deep with one cloud. Mm-hmm. So I think there will be a need for that at some point.
Does everything go to the public cloud in your view? And do we have supercomputers traveling across all industries because of this?
I think at certain scale, it doesn't totally make sense to run on the public cloud for a host of companies that that we're involved with. So, not everything will go to the public cloud. I still see enough companies building out their infrastructure, especially if they're in healthcare or security, or they just have very large scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to live in a hybrid world for a very long time. Many things will move to the cloud without any doubt, and even companies that historically have held everything closely in will do some things. They already are, actually. Their employees are, even if they don't think they are, right? They're using Box, they're using Dropbox, whatever. Mm-hmm. So a lot of functionality will move to the cloud, but we're going to live in a hybrid world, and partly that's generational. Right, you've got most of the people, certainly a large traditional enterprises that are managing the infrastructure are used to doing it all themselves, right, with inside closely walled gardens, and that's sort of what they get paid for. And there's a ton of experimenting going on to a first approximation, at least up until recently. Almost all the experimentation with Hadoop was experimentation. It wasn't a commercial commitment to it. That's starting to change. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to have generational turnover to a younger generation of people who are more used to doing things on a public cloud, are more comfortable with it, understand the issues and constraints. It's not a solution necessarily. It creates its own problems, but as you said. But at the end of the day, I think it's a very hybrid coexistence for a long period of time. They will assume
access to a lot of computing intelligence wherever they are. Let's take some questions from the audience. And then the woman behind. Oh, and Mark.
Hi.
Oh, several. Great.
Thanks. Great panel. I'm a sociologist leading a data science team working on some text analysis problems. And my question for the panel is, do you ever find yourselves in positions where you're battling the open source movement? For instance, I think with my work, eventually I could probably turn a profit on it, but my heart is in building tools that allow researchers to solve social problems at a level higher than the individual consumer. How do you deal with this? It seems like it must be a concern that you invest in some product and then some open source version comes along and wins the whole market.
Just hand that back.
I mean, I can go ahead. So, I mean, I think it's a question of whether just because something is open source doesn't mean that it can't be a business. And we've invested over the years in many companies that have significant open source roots and do turn a profit. In fact, one could probably argue that a lot of the most recent projects in the realm of large data management are going to be all open source, and no entrant that is proprietary will have any chance of competing. So I think it's much more a philosophical issue. Are you running a nonprofit, or are you running a business? And up until this point, nonprofits have a tendency to suffer from a lot of issues where they can't scale and they can't actually serve the needs. So we've found over and over again that the best way to actually make an impact is to have an economic goal and to build teams that will go and help scale that business and make sure that the technology reaches everyone. That's not to say that academics and people that are looking to do good that don't have means, there shouldn't be programs for them to get the technology in their hands.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it depends what your objective is, as Jake just said. I don't want to repeat what he said. It was very articulate and very well stated. There are very many companies you can build on top of open source platforms. A company of ours called Stackstorm just came out of Stealth yesterday, and part of the core of what they're doing is an open source project that they're building on top of. From an economic standpoint, the question is how much value can you add above free, right? Because free is free. if you want to charge for it, right? So it's about building value. If you want to contribute to the community, that's a very different objective than the objective that most of us have up here. His is probably a bit more mixed than mine, right? I have to deliver returns to my investors. You may have a social component to your returns, I don't know. Google obviously has other conflicting objectives, but at the end of the day, if your objective is to contribute to society versus making money, then you might want to go a very different direction. Like
So I'm not sure what the conflicting objectives
We'll take a break from
Multiple
the questions of the audience. What are
multiple objectives. I don't know, for example,
Contending
if he's
is
compensated, based on his economic
And just,
return or strategic
we
contribution.
now want to hear
to
compensation?
Google's
Is that
business.
the next question?
And just to be clear on our goals, we are complete for-profit. Our goal is to make sure we do a good job for our investors. But our investors invested in us because they believe in the vision of using technology to fundamentally change the way healthcare, education, financial services happens. And our belief is that if you make a great impact in the lives of people, let's say around, cancer or diabetes or heart disease or asthma, if you're touching a lot of people's lives, helping them live longer, help live a little better, you're going to create value, enterprise value. So I don't think they go, in our minds, they go hand in hand together.
And there are many investors who do have that as an objective, DBL, double bottom line, and others.
And also to be clear, Google Ventures, even though our money comes from Google, we are, the only goal we're held to is financial returns. Google has other vehicles through which it makes strategic investments.
Where?
Oh, here. So since you're here in Berkeley, I thought we'd just ask you a question about the investor's view of the Berkeley ecosystem, both at the university level and maybe even more broadly, sort of the East Bay as an investable vehicle. So I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, we're lead investors in Captricity right there, so PhD from Berkeley, and so obviously believe in the talent that comes out of Berkeley. And I'm not sure how many more Berkeley or East Bay-based companies we have, but certainly I think between Stanford and Berkeley, I think there's it's pretty even.
So one of the jabs I've heard from some of the older entrepreneurs who've been around the Berkeley ecosystem for a while said that they get the sense that investors would rather get on an airplane and fly to a board meeting in New York City than come across the bridge. So is
You're giving me a little
still
second
the
city
case?
anxiety here, you know.
So we've spun 9 companies out of Berkeley, I think, at last count, and probably an equal number out of Stanford. It's absolutely true that Stanford is better attended to than Berkeley. There are more VCs who pay more attention to Stanford, but quality of the technology here is obviously phenomenal. Tons of opportunities. And I would say it's a pendulum, right? I used to be on the faculty here a million years ago, and at that point in time, 20-ish years ago, say, the pendulum was all on the side of people self-selected to go to Berkeley if they wanted to win Nobel Prizes, and they self-selected to go to Stanford if they wanted to do companies. The pendulum at Berkeley has swung way far toward the company building direction, so a lot more opportunity here. And to their credit, I would say the administration and certainly the faculty have organized themselves in ways that facilitate doing more startup activity here. You guys are better, as aware as I am of the various entrepreneurial programs that go on campus, the accelerators, the incubators that exist here, now that didn't exist even 5 years ago. So it's a much more supportive ecosystem for us, and therefore I think you finding us and many other VCs spending a lot more time.
I think she had a question.
She had a question, and you still have a question? Great.
My name is Sharon. So I work as a data analyst at a marketing analytics startup in San Francisco. So I guess I want to touch up on the topic when you guys brought up the industry that you're seeing a lot of saturation is marketing analytics. So a two-part question. So first is that you guys mentioned that a lot of the end users aren't savvy enough to use a lot of these products that are being provided. But I feel like there are a lot of companies that are doing marketing analytics because there's a demand for it. So what do you guys think about that? And second is that because there are a lot of competition in this field, what do you think that eventually going to differentiate the big data marketing analytics company, that eventually went out? So.
I think I made that comment about there being too many marketing analytics companies. And one of the reasons is I think the barrier to entry is fairly low. I think it's one of the first places that people go is like, oh, there's this fire hose of data from Twitter and Pinterest and Facebook, and I can make use of it and make sense of it and make nice charts and use open source frameworks. And
place web ads. So in both directions, you've got a straight ahead digital proposition. It hit first.
And marketers, I think, tend to like to bring their own tools to work. Like the whole BYOA, bring your own application to work. And I think marketers are probably a bit more fickle, and they're okay adopting one tool for this and that. That's just because they're in the new world of being a marketer, where you're supposed to be more data driven. You want to have a lot of tools to manage your spend on SEO, on SEM, and SEO, and what you're doing with social media. So I think there's a lot of different tools addressing different parts of the puzzle there for marketers, and hence there's so many. And I think in general, the barrier to entry is too low. And so what's going to happen? I think over time, there's going to be consolidation. Already, it's happening faster. And I would say, you just can't have 10 multi-billion-dollar marketing software companies. There will probably be, a handful at best, and we'll see a lot more consolidation over the next, 3 to 5 years.
So, Sharon, what tools do you use?
For our company make?
Yeah.
For your job, actually.
For your job.
For my job, I mainly use Redshift, SQL databases, and then Tableau, combination of Tableau.
Oh, cool.
So I just add, I don't know that the barrier to entry is too low, but I think you wind up in an interesting situation where if you cater to the lowest common denominator in terms of sophistication, then you wind up oftentimes not building a sophisticated enough product to have a huge barrier to entry. And if you do build something that's very sophisticated, then you can sell to the high-end clients, and you do have a little bit of a barrier to entry, but you have a constrained market. And so ironically enough, I think the thing that will differentiate a lot of the marketing analytics companies over time is their go-to-market. I think it's just so noisy right now that the ones that can actually get up above the noise and really figure out how to reach customers in a scalable, with a scalable insertion point and get that first touch quickly are the ones that'll probably, win to the greatest extent.
Okay. Marty Hurst, I'd like to tie a few of the themes together that came up in the panel into a question. So one theme is that you need to create new space in the market as VCs, and you want to exploit those new spaces. Another really interesting thing that came up is the role of regulation in creating markets and in markets, which I found, I was really interested to hear that come up. And there was a recent New York Times article about companies like Airbnb that kind of get ahead of regulations by tackling areas that VCs wouldn't have gone into before, like having people rent out their homes because, often that's not legal. Uber, having people drop people off at the San Francisco airport, which is actually turned out to be against the rules, et cetera. So my question is, what's the role of VCs in helping open up markets by actually trying to get ahead and maybe lobbying government to change the regulations before rather than after breaking all the rules? So healthcare came up, and actually a lot of healthcare innovations can't happen because there are very large entrenched interests in the healthcare IT companies that don't want things to change, and academics try to fight that, but VCs don't necessarily do that. So is there any role for VCs to try to fight the good fight, to open up the markets and to try to influence government before the companies come? Or are you guys going to always just come in after the fact and try to make money after it's all been done?
I think there's
When was the last time you beat your portfolio?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a continuous effort, especially as it pertains to the FDA. There's a VC consortium that spends a lot of time with the FDA, whether it's on biopharma or devices, and it's a known fact that VC returns in biotech and biopharma, as well as medical devices, have been hampered because of the FDA's tight stance on a certain type of devices, especially in the cardiac devices over the last few years. And just in general, it's gotten really difficult for these companies to succeed because it takes so much time and because that's so much money. And that's driven a lot of firms, VC firms, out of those two areas. And I think the FDA is pretty aware of it at the highest levels. And the task at hand is how do you fix it such that so that companies aren't either getting started or actually going to Europe with their devices first because you can get a CE mark much easier. And that's not, I think, the FDA gets it, but I think there's still a ways to go to fix the problem.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of examples like that. There's certainly been VC intervention in FCC-related decisions in a preemptive way, net neutrality rules, et cetera, currently in the news. In the alternative energy space, back when that was booming as a venture subject, it's a little quiet at the moment, but someone like Vinod Khosla spent a lot of time in both Washington and the state of California influencing or trying to influence policies in a way that would facilitate the emergence of alternative energy, alternative resource kinds of companies. You gotta pick your issues. Take that versus trying to influence taxi commissions in 500 localities. That's a tougher problem. That probably isn't that amenable to VC organization.
Well, it sounds like you go through the front door when there's really big formal support, and if it's local and regional, you just, well, in the case of Airbnb, disregarded, and presented them with a fait accompli. So it has to do with the strength of the regulation as much as anything, it sounds like. It's a reality. Okay, I think our next speaker is here, but I want to have a lightning round question because when I have smart guys, I love to ask this. What do you wish you'd studied more in college?
Data science.
Biology.
Math. Psychology.
All right, thank you very much.